Pastor Bruce said something last week. Please be aware that in many ways, maybe going forward, unless something happens or continues to addle me more than I'm currently addled, I'll probably be ending our times together with a question that's posed to you. And I'm going to follow it up with a phrase that a very knowledgeable individual added to the Pastor Bruce question, because I think that that's a valuable one as well to consider when we're having exchanges with people who are Christians or who are churchgoers or who are believers in Jesus. So we'll revisit that when we get there. But I told you this week, because our interrupted study is based on Genesis 4:5, 4:9, that's where we were going to land. And I told you that we'd start this week with 2 questions. So here's what I want to do first. Somebody in the big room, let us know what version you're going to read from, and please go ahead and read Genesis 4:9, and then we'll start with those 2 questions.
All right, so Genesis 4:9, ESV.
Sure.
ESV.
Thank you.
Yep, ESV. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel, your brother?" He said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?"
There's nothing in here to be able to teach and impact and preach. This is just a passing exchange, because the more important stuff happens afterwards when the first murder occurs that's at least recorded in the Bible. So it's crazy for us to take a look and try to unpack anything here. It's this big. It's like Jesus wept. Why would you be able to teach and preach anything on that? 2 words. But surprisingly, there's a whole lesson out of this. So what's the first question that I suggested strongly would be the first question posed this week?
Say that one more time, Preston.
Yeah, what's the first question for this week?
Where is your brother?
Well, that's not my first question. My first question to you was...
Back to read what I wrote.
So I think I've got it here, and I'll read it. It says, why does Yahweh ask, where is your brother? So that's going to be the first question. In fact, I'm asking it right now. Why does Yahweh ask, where is your brother? And I'm going to follow it up this way. Doesn't Yahweh know where Abel is?
Yes.
Okay. That is the question. That's out for you to field.
My first thought is it's one of those situations where this is no reflection on any teenagers that might be nearby, but you ask a teenager, or even some folks that are just in a sense of guilt, where is this? What happened here? That sort of thing. Their response is, whether or not they know doesn't really come into play. They just say, I don't know. So this, to me, is kind of a twofold thing. Number one, it gives them an opportunity to basically own up to what they know. And number two, it does demonstrate for us who come along later that this is part of how things got started. So when we hear somebody say, I don't know, when we know that they know, and he did know that he knew, then we can almost kind of whisper, Cain.
It's not the first time he's asked that type of question either.
That's true. There's a whole
thing. Oh, Adam, Eve, where are you? I'm the God of the universe, and I have no idea where you are.
That's right. Again, allowing them to own up to it. And what have you done? The whole thing. What did you do that?
He's a generous God who gives of his abundance, and he'll provide as much rope as you need to hang yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I like both of those interjections in that, Steve, you're absolutely right. This is not the first time he's asked this question.
Or asked a question that he already knew the answer to.
Sure. In fact, this big, huge tome is littered with the Lord knowing what the outcome of stuff is. And yet, he interacts with us to say, why'd you do that? Where are you? Where's your head at?
I don't know.
Yeah. So, there certainly are some similarities in this question and the first time that we read that the Lord has this interaction with his creation. But there's also perhaps another distinction in the asking here. And this one almost has to do with, I'm going to jump out of this a little bit. Let me throw this out. This has a little bit to do with Myers-Briggs.
Like Myers-Briggs, Preston.
I know some of you do, and I know that this is familiar for some of you. This has a little bit to do with Myers-Briggs. Why would I say that, and how does that make any sense at all?
Well, Myers-Briggs is, of course, personality and how you react and how you handle things, right?
Uh-huh.
So I'm trying to think how you're going to go with this because, you know, if you're thinking that it's with Abel, you're looking at his personality or his character.
Yeah, I'm not thinking about that guy right now because he ain't around. Looking at this guy who the Lord's talking to.
Other than just what his reaction to the question is or would be. To take his temperature to see where he stands.
So let's jump to the second question. We'll talk kind of simultaneously about the two. Second question I told you I was going to ask is, what does Cain's response, "Am I my brother's keeper," mean?
Well, it depends because, you know, perhaps his view is, do I know where he is? But really, what is the true meaning of being a brother, your brother's keeper, right? Which, because truly, we should all be that because by being your brother's keeper, you're looking out for them and their well-being.
This is where the Myers-Briggs comes in because of what you just said, Sarah. Here's what I mean. Let me throw this across your bow so for those of you I've lost, I can bring you back into the statement. If you believe that you're an I, well, I won't do the letters. If you believe that you are an I, somebody help me know what I means with those Myers-Briggs things?
Introvert.
That's right. If you label yourself as that, or you allow the standardized testing or the personality testing to label you that, then where is your perspective and thinking supposedly grounded all the time?
Yourself.
That is correct. And sometimes it's a very, very difficult thing to get. You don't even have to take a Myers-Briggs. We are so mired in our own stuff. All I have that occupies my day is thinking of my own stuff. So let me throw this out at you because when I see this question, one of my favorite trite phrases comes into play. And I giggle at this, and maybe you've heard it before. And if I'm wrong, help me get back on the podium the right way. When my thought about Cain's response to the Lord is this: not my circus, not my monkeys, not my business.
Well, because that is his take on it, right? He's like, I don't know where he is. I don't know his schedule. Why should I need to worry about that? Right?
Well, we know certainly what he's done. But in a lot of ways, he's really just kind of, he's blowing off. Well, all right, somebody on my end here has said a four-letter word, and that word is he's a punk. Your thoughts?
I think this is, quite frankly, part and parcel with how the whole thing begins. The other questions that Steve referenced. What's going on here? Well, there's an accusatory tone to this. The woman you gave me, it's your fault. And then the whole passing the buck begins. Well, it was the serpent, and he tricked me, and all that kind of thing. So we have a tendency to deflect not only that, but I think when he says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" he's kind of saying, "Don't you know? I mean, aren't you keeping track of all that kind of stuff?" So he's almost accusing Yahweh God of not having done his job.
But he's turning the blame from himself onto God,
Mhm.
right? Because, like I said earlier, being your brother's keeper is looking out for the best for them, right?
Mhm.
Not causing them bodily harm.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's really the whole thing. We and the good Presbyterians would say we even in an ideal situation we are going to mess up. So and they do that. They deflect. They accuse. They try and I say we do that.
I want to kind of add on to Gene because I was kind of going down a little bit of the same path with him, but I'm going to use a different word and I'll use my own experience. Back when I lived near most of you, I was in the church building one morning, and I just want to just be transparent. Pastors don't like everybody the same in the church. Some people, Jay McSwain that does Place Ministries talks about VDPs, and there's a fair number of VDPs in the world. That's the acronym for very draining people, and we tend to we try to avoid them at all costs. But there was a certain very draining person that I had interaction with, and I remember one morning I was walking down the hall, busy, got 9 things going on. And they came blowing out of the restroom and proceeded in a kind of ugly way to ask me where somebody was. And my response was, it's not my day to watch them. And that didn't make them very happy. But oh well, I had to apologize later for being kind of curt. But that response for me was driven by a certain level of disdain. That's the word I wanted to get to. I just, give me a break. You go find them. And I got a sense of that with Adam, with Cain as well. All you guys have said, but he had just gotten dissed because his sacrifice. But the reason his sacrifice wasn't good is that there was a disdain toward God. And so it's just kind of an ongoing disrespect, really, in my mind, disdain for God. It's like Preston said, not my rodeo or not my circus, whatever he said. That's where I am. It's just, whatever, dude. I got better things to do than keep an eye on him, even though we kind of know where he is.
I think there's a little flavor of a how you worship thing. There's a kind of modern expression, you can't Christian alone. Which goes back to, Peter saying, don't be like those that neglect to meet together, that whole thing. The previous scene where, they both bring their sacrifices and Cain's rejected and Abel's is accepted. That's a scene of a worship service, whatever you might call it, kind of feels like a temple service in the Jewish context. But point being, in the whole scheme of the Bible and then our, Christian society that comes out of it is, there's always this temptation or this, idea that, oh, well, I'm worshiping God, especially, which turns into I'm worshiping God my way, which I can be generous that there are some perfectly acceptable ways to do that, and sometimes times require it. And, those are all long conversations. But when you have your brother right next to you on, he's in the pasture and you're in the garden, you're hanging out at the same farmhouse. It's not like this is really inconvenient. It's not that inconvenient to walk over to the gate and say, hey, bro, it's time to go over to the chapel. Let's go see God together. So not just a matter of accountability, but proper worship. If you have the opportunity to worship together, you're supposed to, because it's not just about you and God, it's us and God.
That's a mouthful that's got a lot of potential incrimination and recriminations for those of us who may not quite want to embrace what you just said, Trent. We like Christianity in a vacuum. And I'm an American. I've been taught flying solo is the only way to go. That it's a joke that kind of people coming sometimes from outside the United States have toward watching United States drivers. Is our highways are full of cars populated by one person only. And there are several countries where if they have a car, sometimes the car is like the circus car. There's a pant load of people in it. And when
A
you
motorcycle, it's like that.
yes, sir. Yeah. And when you suggest to Americans to carpool, we actually get offended by that. Let alone to do what it is that Trent just suggested about worshiping, not the vacuum. I'm not willing to share my car. I'm not willing to sit next to somebody that I don't know in a movie theater, let alone worship with somebody. What are you talking about? It's personal and private. That's a big joke that my wife and I have in our household. People's religions are personal and private. When I believe that this big, huge book we have suggests it should be absolutely otherwise. Other thoughts about this Cain and Yahweh exchange? Okay. Doors continues to be open, but that leads itself to my question 3. This is posed to you as well. So how do you personally feel about being your brother or your sister's keeper? And I appreciate Pastor Bruce saying, pastors and folks that are of the cloth are people too. And sometimes folks just get on your nerves. Now, you really can't get on somebody's nerves. I mean, that's just, the euphemism, right? But they bug the heck out of you. So if you have a chance, you look to kind of go the other way. So how do you feel about being your brother or your sister's keeper?
That's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah. So we're Americans. We're adult Americans. We love responsibility. We love responsibility, right?
We love responsible people.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, yes, but we don't want to be responsible for stuff because then it comes to us. We're held accountable. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. I was using the word liable. I'm like, no, get my insurance brain out. Yes, accountable.
I like Trent. Did you hear what Trent said?
He said we like responsible people.
Yes, we like responsible people. We don't necessarily value being responsible for other people. In fact, some of us struggle with being responsible for other people as parents. Let alone being responsible for someone who's, and this is in the vernacular of the community and culture today, it's a word I've heard all my life. Maybe it's a word now that you've heard and read more often. If you're grown, I shouldn't have to be responsible for you.
Yeah, I've actually heard people say that I'm only responsible for my kids until they're 18, and then after that, they're on their own. I'm going, really?
Right.
Really? That doesn't seem to be right.
I've been thinking recently about an encounter we had at the store. And we have this with some regularity. The encounter of we'll call them beggars. The polite term is panhandlers. And there are some of those that if they were offered an opportunity to get cleaned up and have a job and be responsible, they would decline that. And that's some of the reason, and this is an overgeneralization, I understand, but that's some of the reasons some of the folks are doing what they're doing because they're basically, again, deflecting their responsibility to the folks that'll hand out to them. So they might even begin to be responsible, but then they'll fall back into their old practices. We had years ago, we had a fellow that we tried to help in New York City, Otto. And it was like, here's a guy, he's got some other physical limitations. I mean, he has trouble walking even. But as we began to try to help him, little by little by little, he kind of slid back into what was comfortable for him, which included not being responsible for other people, jobs, bills, etc. And so I think that when we begin to diagnose our wanting to be responsible, we want to be responsible to the point where it is also authoritative. We have power in addition to our responsibility. We're not really liking the burden of responsibility. And that's just my take.
I want to challenge that a little bit, Gene, in that I think that the commentary that you just shared about that experience with the folks who are looking for handouts is probably lends itself more to our last week's discussion, which was what will permit our fellowship to minister to other worship groups in need of support. And here's why. This next question will help to fine-tune better the communication that you just shared with us. So, who qualifies as your brother or sister? Now recognize too, I'm going to try to make a distinction. The Bible talks about your neighbor, and the Bible talks about your brother and sister. And those are actually two distinctive groups. So who qualifies as your brother and sister?
The fellow believers in Jesus.
Okay, somebody go to Matthew 12, 48 through 50. Somebody read that when you get there. Matthew 12, 48 through 50. Ready when you guys are.
I happen to have an RSV from doing school stuff. So it says, but to the one who had told him this, Jesus replied, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" And pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother."
Can you guys see this? Thank you, Trent. Can you guys see this as the differentiation? This is where you should understand that there's a difference on the church signs sometimes that say we're all God's children versus we're all God's creation. Can you see the difference in what it is that Trent just read?
Mm-hmm.
So how does Jesus himself define your brothers and sisters? Our brothers and sisters.
Well, the implication is clear, those that do my Father's will. And God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. So those that have trusted in Christ have at least begun that process, but there are other criteria that might be in the one that do his will.
That is
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Obedient.
Okay. Now, I would go a step further. I'm not going to do it so much yet, because if you guys are going to use obedient, the only way to be able to know if somebody's obedient would be how?
Get in their business.
That would be correct. So I'm not going to go there yet. But you said the word, so I had to at least remind you when we come back to it. So can you see the difference in the definition here of who's your brother and sister / family and who's your neighbor?
Yeah, and that goes back to the Samaritan
Yes.
and you know, the lawyer, and that's not what we would call a lawyer today. He's a Bible scholar, theologian. He's a lawyer, and that he's studying the Torah. And he says, "Well, who's my neighbor?" And this is what precipitates the whole. And I'm going to call it an account. I believe that this actually happened, and maybe even something that these people were aware of, and some of these people that Jesus describes might have even been in the midst, going, "Ooh, I remember that," kind of thing. So the neighbor is basically all of God's creation to you, George.
Yeah, I'm right on board with you there, Brother Gene, unless somebody speaks up and says, no, that's not quite right. Because what Jerry and Sherry, their unique encounter this week was actually with a neighbor. Now, through maybe later interactions, they may have learned, Jerry may have learned, but with this emphasis that he'd like her to become part of the family, but she may not be part of the family just yet. But she definitely was a neighbor. And there's a difference between the two. Neighbors and brothers and sisters. So this lesson is not about our neighbors. This lesson is about our brother and being our brother and sister's keeper. Make sense? Okay. So are you qualified to be your brother and sister's keepers?
We're qualified.
Yep. You qualify.
We're rolling that around, thinking about that.
If we are followers of Jesus, then yeah, we're qualified. Right? I mean, that's the criteria.
I think to the extent that we're also scripturally introspective, if we the whole splinter log thing, if we're trying to look out for somebody else's interest and we've got an issue of our own that's similar to that but much greater, we probably need to address that before we try to address their issue. So I think that there is a qualification on our qualification in that we need to be working towards making certain we're walking correctly before we try to steer other people straight.
And thank you for that, Gene. I'm going to have Ellen chime in a second and tell you a little bit of an account that occurred to help us understand walking correctly, right? And it's going to sound like it's an awry kind of account, but I want you to hear it for what it is to be able to, so we can take a look at it and understand it. Years ago, one of the things I learned from Pastor Bruce, and I used to have a discussion regularly with him about this, is how do you preach endlessly to folks who look like what you say doesn't matter to them? Thank you, Trent. You preach not the same thing, but for the most part, the theme is there. It's just you're using different examples from this book that we say is supposed to be our course material. And so you're presenting this information week after week, and yet people still do the same things that they did. And I got to understand from him what kind of that calling on your life looks like. And I didn't get this until years ago when he sort of said this to me, is that sometimes the key is being obedient. You can't, look, we're Americans and we're adults, and we've been brought up to be results oriented. Almost the scariest place to find and be able to measure with metrics the results is the church. It's tough because you have a whole lot of false positives. And the Bible teaches about those false positives. The Bible calls them the wheats and the tares. So it looks like you've got the right harvest. It looks like you're creating the right results and outcome, but you don't really know. Well, one of the things that I did learn from Pastor Bruce, and this relates itself to Brother Gene's talking about the log or the sawdust, the speck in your brother's eye versus the log in your own eye. If you're in a position where you're teaching and you're preaching and you're taking responsibility for Jesus' people understanding what our roles are, what the correct way to walk is. You've got to first apply that to yourself. Now, look, it doesn't mean that it's going to fix me instantaneously. And here's why it doesn't, because I ain't going to let it. Sometimes I don't like what it is that the Bible's telling me to do or what Jesus expects of me, because I like me a lot better the way that I am. So I'm going to preach something, but for the most part, yeah, the Lord gave it to me, but I'm preaching it to you. You need to do this. The reason I'm telling you that is what makes us better qualified, is what Brother Gene just said, is it doesn't mean that you can't minister and be your brother's keeper, even if you got a log in your own eye. But first, you got to look at the log in your own eye and go, I got a log in my eye. And sometimes you can go to your brother and sister and say, excuse me, I have a log hanging out of my eye. But can we talk a little bit that you're beginning to have a speck of a log in your eye? Because sometimes when you use the nostalgia of the road that you were on, or the moment that you're in right now, to say to somebody, I see it's happening for you, and if I can help, I'd like for it not to happen in a similar or the same way. So you can minister to somebody with a log hanging out of your eye, with a canoe hanging out of your eye. But don't go on it. You got to take a look at the fact that there's a canoe in your eye. So let me pause there and have you respond if that makes sense.
All right. I agree absolutely with what has just been said for the last minute and a half. The problem is what pride will do is say, yeah, I know you got that log, and I'm not going to listen to you until you get your log taken care of. And that's a problem too. And that where the issue where that comes in is sometimes, because if we understand keeper, right, and Gene could do the word study, you know, old versus new and all that, but I mean, you're supposed to be a watchman and a guard over somebody. And that doesn't mean that you have to absolutely have it all figured out. That just means the Lord said, look out, and you tell them, look out. But there's a sense to say, well, you haven't read the Bible as many times as I have. You don't pray as well as I do. Your marriage isn't as good as mine. You drive a junky car, and you're half my age, so therefore you cannot be my keeper. And none of that is a qualifier. Just, are you a blood-washed follower of Jesus Christ? And has the Lord given you a sense that you need to say something to my brother or sister? At which point, all that other, really, while it's true, doesn't disqualify us from being a keeper.
I think that's very, very powerful, Bruce, because now you're not just talking about qualifications from the perspective of Yahweh, but now you're talking about, and I'm going to use a different word, credibility with regard to the one to whom you want to minister. They may not accept us as being a credible paraclete, if you will, someone to come alongside and comfort and encourage, because they see how we're messing it up as well. So I think one of the hardest things, it seems to me, for us to do as mature Christians, and I mean that in both senses, is to have somebody who can basically physically run circles around us. They've got the youth, they've got other stuff that's messed up, but when they speak a word of truth, we need to be able to see that and hear that and go, you know what, you are right. And that pride you're talking about, we need to set that all aside.
I think a lot of times our natural reaction is to be defensive when we are approached with something like that. And it is kind of hard when you get that reproach from someone or confrontation with someone who's kind of trying to show you where you might need to work on some things to not be offended. And on the other side of that, the person who is trying to help, to go beside and encourage, probably needs to have to grow a tougher skin and be aware there's probably going to be pushback just because of our natural inclination to want to defend our actions and not take that responsibility.
And we see that natural tendency in the first few chapters of Genesis that we've already been referencing. We come by it naturally, and naturally is not always a great word.
This is a hard saying. This is not popular. It is popular to kind of teach this and get the heck away from this, because the weightiness of this, in many ways, our relationship not only with Jesus but each other, leans pretty strongly in this Genesis 4:9 concept. And I appreciate Pastor Bruce weighing in, talking about being able to minister to each other, but I'm not letting you minister to me because you're not such and such and such and such. Sometimes, folks, this is why we need to rely back on part of what our mission statement says: praying people, equipped by Jesus, right? So sometimes the way that you diffuse the difficulty of young lion confronting old lion, veteran being confronted by rookie, sometimes the way that you do that is the person that is the more able to practice humility allows both of you, or starts the exchange with a submission for both of you to the Holy Spirit. Because sometimes that is the diffuser, helps sometimes to settle people's hearts. It makes sometimes their ire and their angst and their I'm putting up with this because it makes that the cowardly lion response kind of at least put on pause for a short spell.
This also, and I'm going to kind of play off of your Bert Lahr invitation there. One of the things that the lion had as an issue was the expectations other people had of lions. And because he was not that, he was defensive. He was trying to play up to their expectations. And what we oftentimes do is we have people that, what was it? By now you should be teachers, and now you're still drinking the pablum. You're not where you ought to be. And so there's an expectation when we're dealing with each other that may or may not actually be there. And so we have to kind of do the humility thing. And I've had it happen myself, where somebody approached me and it's like, yeah, you're right. I need to do this differently. And I try to do that. So I think we need to set aside what folks might expect of us and what we might think they expect of us, and that's the whole perception thing, and actually just get down to brass stacks and be real.
Being real is relative. I know what you mean. But I think you mean to be real Jesus people, because being real is part of our problem. Because when I'm really me, I'm blowing up stuff.
I didn't know that. You're a pyro?
Oh no, I'm bigger than a pyro. I'm the guy that go gets the stuff for the 4th of July year round, and I put it in your yard and blow it up.
C4.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a hurt locker all to his own, man.
There you go. Why go small? Stuff is around, so doggone it. But under my own strength, I like to blow stuff up. You guys have already heard. One of my favorite lines from Bruce Almighty is, Almighty Smiter, because I think smiting should be my business. Leave the smiting to me, Lord. You handle rulership of the cosmos. I'll handle the smiting.
You got your button, so you just press it and smite.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Exactly. So I want to ask this next question, but I'm going to ask Ellen to follow this up with a count that's going to sound a little silly, but it's based on the answer and based on something Gene opened up a little while ago. So the question that I have, because we've gone through, how do you feel about being your brother's sister's keeper? By the way, all of you didn't chime in on that, so that means most of you are great about it. Because the few of you who spoke out, appreciate you doing that. What qualifies you as your brother or sister's keeper, or excuse me, your brother or sister? That was at Matthew 12:48 through 50. I just asked you if you're qualified to be your brother and sister's keeper, and that's a personal question. You need to think about that. And the answer ultimately is if I am doing the will of my Father, if I'm being obedient to what Jesus said I'm supposed to do, then I'm potentially qualified. As long as I'm looking at the canoe or the redwood that's in my eye. So the next question is this one. So if that's the case, and you all are perfectly fine with these, under what conditions do you refuse to be your brother and sister's keeper? I want you to remember Gene talking just a couple moments ago about being real and operating in some ways in the correct way. Now, I want you to hear an interesting account that Ellen experienced this week, and then I want you to reflect on that a little bit. Maybe we'll chuckle while we take a look at this question. Under what conditions do you refuse to be your brother and sister's keeper? Can you come over to the special chair? Carol Merrill, ladies and gentlemen, old reference, but
Where do you want to start, or just the whole account?
it's short.
Okay. All right. So we live in a single family community here and have amenities, a pool being one of them that I enjoy regularly. But on the same property or whatever is a condo complex, and they have their own set of amenities. And so several weeks back, the condo association has sent out email to say, please be mindful that there are people from the condos coming to use their pool. They have their own facilities, they should be there. We're adding special stickers on your amenity cards so that we can easily identify who's who. And so fast forward, there was a spell where lightning hit our amenity card reader, so they were, there was a code to lock the gate with a regular padlock. But so the other day, I was riding my bike to the pool, and my path to ride to the pool is I go by where the exit or entrance area is for the condos. So I saw this group of 6 or 7 people, 3 adults, a couple teenagers, a couple of kids coming out of the condo complex, towels, wet hair, heading towards what looked like our amenities. And I was going to the pool myself. So I'm on a bike, so I get there first, and I'm in the water, and, lo and behold, this group of 7 are coming up on one of the entrance gates to the pool. Now I'm in the water with a couple of other residents, and I said to them, I bet that their cards aren't going to work because they're not part of our complex. And sure enough, I see them attempting. It doesn't work. And then one of the persons in their party actually went to the gym door, and you see them coming out of another door and letting the rest of the party in. And so one of the persons in the water with me says, well, I'm not going to say anything to them. And I'm like, I'm going to say something to them because I saw where they came from. So, and so it clearly looked like they were not residents here. So I walk.
That could be it.
So I swim to the lower end of the pool. The woman who actually let the rest of her party in, I see her. I said, excuse me. I said, these are amenities for the homes here. If you're residents of the condo, you have pools in your area. And she's like, oh, no, I'm a resident here. I said, oh, really? Because you were attempting to get in. Your card wasn't clearly working. You have 2 pools down in your condo complex. This is our pool. Oh, no, I'm a resident here. I regularly use the gym, and for some reason the card isn't working. I said, well, the card works it's one card for all of it. And, she says, well, I live here. We were visiting friends at the condo, and, we decided to walk up and use the pool here. And I was like, well, that's really odd. I said, your card works on each one of the interest points. It shouldn't just be working for the gym. It was obvious to me she had probably went behind someone into the gym and let her family through. So I said, well, you probably need to get in touch with the condo association because if you're a resident here, your card isn't obviously working correctly. And so they kind of sat where they were for a few minutes longer. They attempted to get into the restroom, the cards weren't working, and then they left. So that was fine.
Thank you. Now, I didn't have you talked with, it sounds like maybe a couple other people who were commenting on you needing to address this issue.
No, they didn't. They said, well, I'm not going to say anything. It's basically what they said.
Okay.
And I'm like, well, I'm going to say something because I actually physically saw them coming from what was a different part. They had their own section to us. And so it was clearly a presence. Yeah. And I'm not a confrontation person, but
All right, thank you. So aside from the HOA and the proprietary homeowners community stuff you should all avoid in life, why would I have Ellen tell you the account of the pool intruders?
Well, she saw from whence they came, right?
Uh-huh.
So if you see somebody from where they are, and if they are behaving incorrectly, then she was attempting to correct that behavior.
How many of you would have done the same thing that my crazy spouse did? I appreciate that, Trent, because look, Trent walks up to me, I'm getting the heck out of wherever Trent points. So the fact that Trent shook his head, okay, I dig it. But if Trent comes within about 50 feet of me, I'm going. He doesn't have to say anything. But I
I'm just happy
appreciate
I
it.
don't have an HOA.
Well,
You're
I
a
do have
smart
an HOA, and I can tell you, man, I've waded into that a few times, and you get your head handed to you, man. And
Yes.
and here's the thing, just speaking as an adult, I'm not too worried about somebody punching me in the mouth. Though I did have a guy, as I shared with you, get up in my face a while back before I resigned from the HOA board. But I just don't want to put up with their junk, man. Because once you wade in there, you're going to get every excuse. You're going to get all kinds of recriminations back at you because you're a creep. Which I'm sure they probably thought of Ellen. They just knew she was a creep. But yeah, I just don't think we want to deal with it. And so it's easier to just let it go or hope that you'll have an Ellen who will wade into it and you'll thank her for just looking out for your best interest.
Yeah, we think that somebody else will take care of the problem, right? Or we hope that somebody else will take care of the problem.
Well, there's a
Or
whole.
you've got a board or somebody that's hired to do that job.
Yes.
It's their job, and you're going to send them to do it, or you hired a management company to do it, and that's what they do for a living. So you don't need to do that because they'll take care of it.
Well, I think it's important to note that the very thing that Kane responded, I don't know, he did know, was a lie. And it sounds like from what Ellen told us, the first thing out of their mouth is a lie. And so I'm not a big fan of being lied to, particularly when I know what the truth is. So the fact that she didn't say that, kudos to her. She might have just escalated things pretty quickly when if she had said, no, that's a lie, that could have been really, really unpleasant. So would I have done the same thing? She's got a lot of chutzpah, and I'm going to say that.
Well, speaking as a pastor, I can tell you that lots of times when you do go as a brother's or sister's keeper and you try to wade into it, their first response is a lie. Now, it may not seem like that to them, but I can't tell you how many times when I've approach, long before I was even a pastor, when I saw somebody their attendance falls off in church, or they're just not acting the same way that they had before. And you go to them and you say, hey, brother, I sense there's something going on with you. What's up? They don't tell you the first pass. They don't tell you the truth. And sometimes you don't find out till later from somebody else what the truth really was. And so, Gene, I appreciate you touching on that, because when we do try to be the keeper, sometimes we don't get the truth.
And I'm going to let you speak in just a moment. Even when basically there's a formula here that Cain plays out for us. Number one, they're going to lie, and number two, they're going to deflect. And that's what they're going to do, because that's the natural thing for us to do. It's self-preservation.
I think with Ellen's situation, I may or may not have said something directly to them. I think the usual path I would have taken was I would have picked up my cell phone and called security there to let them, they're the guys that's paid to do that. And call them down there and take care of that. Now here's the rock in the saddle or rock in the shoe for that situation with us. If I call Jesus my Father, I am that guy.
That's right. That's right.
And I think sometimes even though it would be maybe the right thing to do, the rule thing to do, if it's not personally affecting us, me, I will always be the one who's going to take the initiative. If it's even though I know it's not what it should be, someone's breaking the rules, they shouldn't be here, but if it's not personally affecting me, if they came in and they were causing a big stink and a commotion and they were, acting, unruly or something like that, that might be something different. And then I knew that they weren't supposed to be there to begin with. But I think sometimes if it's not affecting me personally, even though the right thing to do would be to confront someone, I may not always take that initiative.
But in Ellen's case, what she was doing was she was guarding and protecting the other people who weren't willing to come forward.
Yeah.
Very much.
Right.
It's true.
Yeah. Now, I've seen those pools. We're just there. And we stayed in the condo association. Never once did I go down other than drive by to look at it from a distance at the pool that Ellen and I have the privileges to. But there's two nice pools in that condo association. Nothing wrong with them. A little smaller, yeah. But they're nice. They're clean. The water was refreshing. You've got restrooms there and everything. And then the walkway down there, that was wrong.
We'll say Jesus has something to say about all this whole complex of questions. It's down Matthew 18. He starts, if a brother sins against you, go confront him with it. And if he puts you off, then take 2 or 3 with you to confront him, then bring it in front of the whole congregation.
Yep.
And then after that, expel him from the group. So call that part B. Part A is specifically what you guys were just saying. If a brother sins against you, it's not really if a brother just kind of technically violates some abstract rule that is out there, but like there's an actual impact, impact on yourself, impact on an innocent bystander, maybe an impact on themselves, like it's an actual, wages of sin kind of concern. I think that's a little bit more where my threshold would be personally, just for the comment on that. But then for the rest of it, for the part B, is kind of the larger thing is Jesus is talking about where does your responsibility begin and end? It begins with, hey, if you see something, say something. Especially if you're involved personally, like he leads in with, if you're involved personally. The previous parable is the lost sheep. The good shepherd leaves the 99 and goes after the one. So it's not a matter of trying to weed out who doesn't belong here. It's a matter of we're trying to bring everybody back. We're trying to keep it all together. We're trying to keep the band together and playing on the same sheet of music here. So if you see something, he doesn't say go find somebody else to take care of it for you. He says go talk to them. And then if that doesn't work, go find somebody else to help you talk to them, but stay involved. And then yes, there's the whole subsidiarity, keep it at the lowest level possible.
Right.
Only escalate as you have to. Okay, that's cool.
Right.
Like that,
Right.
that's all good, prudent stuff. But the very next thing he talks about is Peter asks him, if a brother sins against me, how many times am I supposed to forgive? It's the whole not 7 times, but 70 times 7. All along, the motivation is to first bring it up, call it out. And yes, that includes if you see a splinter in your brother's eye, but there's a log in your own eye, we get it. But think about 1 Corinthians. Paul talks about don't be a stumbling block to weaker believers. That's not just about idols that are sacrificed to meat. It's not just about that dirty rock and roll music. It's anything. Maybe you are the weaker believer here and you're trying to say something. That person should have the humility and the maturity to recognize what's going on, and hey, instead of getting defensive and how dare you talk to me that way, hey, let's get onto the same page together with this. We've each got something that we can talk to each other about. That wouldn't happen unless you initiated the conversation, as Jesus is pointing out back in Matthew 18. In 1 John talks about, if we confess our sins, right, it's part of a whole passage about don't go in with the attitude that you don't have any sins. So, stitch all of these little, squares together and you get more that big picture attitude of, okay, we get it. Everybody has something, right? There's nobody that you can cruise through life thinking they've got it figured out or it's all taken care of and nobody should talk to them. But also, that doesn't mean you're disqualified from talking. We know everybody has something, but if you're in the right place at the right time, then like Isaiah, here I am, Lord, send me.
You've touched on a volume of things, Trent, and I don't know if we'll get to all of those through this interrupted training, but you're talking about the whole of Scripture. You're talking about small parts contributing to the tapestry, recognizing how this whole new and old is actually one thing that we should be applying to our lives. You're talking about diffusing the power of kind of foibles and sometimes sin by confessing not only he's faithful to forgive us from all unrighteousness, but also by confessing our sins one to another. And that's sometimes what makes it easier to look at the kayak or the ski pole that's hanging out of your own eye when you tell somebody, sometimes I have a ski pole that's jutting out of my both eyes. That diffusing, that ability to kind of recognize the challenge in the tents we occupy is something sometimes that we have to submit to the Holy Spirit about and say, I'm just not as changed as I'm supposed to be. I'm just not as transformed as I'm supposed to be. And folks, please, I think you guys have done a good job, but I need to say it just for posterity's sake and for video's sake for when perhaps people listen to this if we post it. Not talking about legalism here. This is not legalism. So I didn't have Ellen tell you the story about following the rules, because the following the rules is what's gotten our church in the problem it's got right now. Don't do, as opposed to we get to do, and we want you to get to do. And the getting to do is loving Jesus for who he is and what he did for us. So we spend so little time telling folks that that's what we get to do, but we spend the time telling we hate, don't. I don't want to be a part of a club that every doggone rule is don't do, you can't have, you can't say. What do we get to do? Right? And so when I go back to my wife's encounter with these pool folks, by the way, which I'm not really sure I would have the bravery to go up to these folks and say, excuse me, realize right now you are doing something that constitutes as an infraction on our community. I'm pretty much not going to do that one. I'll do other stupid stuff, but probably not that one. But folks, it's real easy for us to practice what we think is minding our own business. And here's the funny thing. Yahweh asked Cain what he asked him because part of the implication here is, I've already talked to you about your brother and the contrast between yours and your brother's condition. You probably know, and again, I'm speaking kind of to a little bit of the grayness of what's not here in the Bible. Yahweh's saying, you know the difference between your heart and your brother's heart condition. And there's something that the two of you can probably learn from each other. And so you acting as though you don't know where he is and it's not your business is not okay. But I hope what we're beginning to uncover in this part of this interrupted lesson is this. Part of the reason I don't want to do this is because I don't want the headache. I don't want to meddle. I don't want to be involved. And here's a nice one that church people use a lot. I don't want to judge others. Come on. Judging others is what almost we do best. We major in judging others. That's how we figure out who our friends are going to be and who the people are that we like and who we don't like. Because we do the thing that Pastor Bruce referenced earlier. There are people who I need to get my very special wetsuit on in order to hang out with them for the day. And I'd rather not put my wetsuit on. So I'd like to hang out with people where I can just wear my shorts and t-shirt. So the reason I don't really want to be my brother's keeper is because it's too messy. I don't want to meddle. I don't want to get involved. And frankly, I don't think I'm in position to be judging others. Except when I do, which is all the time.
But could you also look at it that we don't want to become our brother or sister's keeper because then that gives other people the right to be that to us?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what that judge not lest you be judged kind of suggests. Same metrics, the same yardstick that you use on other folks. Be prepared that it can be used to judge you as well. Brother, where art thou? Come let us, and I like this because this is where Trent was too. Come let us reason together. That's where a lot of this comes from. But the folks who are the modern day church, first of all, and this is where I said Trent he does this. He opens volumes of other places to go. Because we don't have mentorship, we don't have discipleship, and we don't have person who's learning from someone who's the same person teaching somebody else. We've just got the economy of how we become mature believers all out of whack. So since I'm not comfortable speaking to anybody to help them have an idea of what pleases the Lord best, and I'm not comfortable with somebody speaking into my life to help me to do that, nobody better be speaking to anybody except the guy we pay to do that. And for some of you, I'll actually share this with you because I don't know if most of you should know this. We had a member of our church when we were in the building years ago who, from his position with the worship team, would attempt to use the worship music and the theme to help people experience transformed lives. And in many ways, this party left our believership because they felt railroaded out. Because people would say to this party, this person who was a part of our worship team, that's not your job. That's the job of Pastor Bruce. That's what Pastor Bruce does. That's not your job. You shouldn't be doing it. And so we create a situation where it's not okay for us to meddle, involve ourselves in each other's lives, even when it's not on a person-to-person basis. You better not be, if you're not Gene, if you're not Pastor Bruce, you better not be telling me anything because you're on the same level I am. So let me pause there and prepare to kind of close down for the week. There's a lot of opportunity for you guys to comment. Please do.
Well, I think first of all, the word compassion just literally means to suffer together. You know, and just for the sake of the vocabulary of it, we talk about kind of the difference between how men and women interact as women interact face to face and men interact shoulder to shoulder. And without leaning too heavily on that, what I'm getting at is You think about compassion, it's that opportunity to be shoulder to shoulder as we face God together. Why should that person have to confess everything by himself? You know, you're not coming to them to point something out just in order to see them squirm. You want to come because, hey, I've got my thing, you've got your thing, and I don't think you realize it. Let's together come before God. Each confessing our own things, sure, but we're here together. Because in the very next breath, we can be worshiping God together. You know, and that's what Cain didn't want to do. He didn't want to be shoulder to shoulder with Abel.
He didn't like Abel. Thank you, by the way. You're the first person who said that today. Thank you. He did not like Abel. He didn't like him a lot. Who else?
I don't know, as I hear you guys talking this, and it's kind of pulling some things from this, you know, Sarah said early on, I think it was Sarah that said early on in her Jesus encounter about loving somebody enough, right? Wasn't that you, Sarah? Loving
Yes.
somebody enough?
I borrow from my husband because he says that all the time. So I borrow from my
Yeah.
husband. Yes.
Yeah, wanting more for them than they want for themselves lots of times. But I think that's one of the big risks in being your brother's keeper is sometimes you want it more than they do. And you're willing to do what Trent said, which is to stand beside them, stand with them and say, come on, let's take this trip together. And it's when that works, that's amazing because now you have this opportunity to celebrate whatever that was that could, sorry for the you must much used word, but that breakthrough and to see them be able to take that next step in their walk. But when they say, nah, I don't want to do that, that's heartbreaking because you were ready to go with them. And you know that if they can get through it, there's going to be so much more for them down the road. But yet they don't want to do that. And so, you went with the best of intentions and they're not willing to take that step. And you walk away, really somewhat heartbroken because they weren't. So there's those times where you really do like Abel and you really do want to see him go somewhere and he doesn't want to. And so that is one of the risks with being that brothers and sisters keeper to you.
Some of the fallout of that scenario that Pastor Bruce just described is when you really want to like Abel, because you really do like him, and you go in an attempt to say, let's go worship the Lord together, and in doing so, let's be able to confess the opportunity areas of our lives to one another and to him, and that gets rebuked. Well, not only do I not like Abel as much, I'm not doing that ever again. I'm not setting myself in the position to ever feel that way again. So somebody better not suggest to me that I need to be my brother's keeper, because being my brother's keeper frankly stinks. I'm not doing that. I want you to think about these next two questions for next week. So be prepared. I'm going to ask you the questions next week, but I'm going to maybe ask you to remind me with the questions. So here's the two questions that we're going to start with next week. What is Jesus's position about being your brother or your sister's keeper? What's Jesus's position on that? And then the second question is, what's the potential outcome of you keeping your brother/sister? What's the potential outcome? Folks, the business of people is messy. It's cumbersome. It's layered in sometimes complexity as well as silliness. And we are defensive, prideful, hubris-filled, Folks, and perhaps as Americans, we're island oriented in terms of it's not your job to tell me what you think about my life. It's not your job to tell me. And surprisingly, even when you're doing a good job of this, there are folks that when, because I'm going to ask you the question I told you, I'm going to close with the question in just a second, and follow it up with a piece of knowledge by a guy who's able to coin and turn a phrase every now and then. But surprisingly, sometimes you don't meet people who are defensive and rude, but what they are is, and they don't necessarily lie, but they have a reason. So when you attempt to, thank you for that, when you attempt to speak into their life to show that you have a desire to kind of link arms and come along with them, they will tell you all the reasons that they can't do that. And you've heard me for years, you've heard me, and some of you have experienced this together with me. I know, but. And it has been my postulate that I've taken away from those examples, some happening as much as 13 years ago when I first started hearing that rampant in the church. When I hear that, that is kind of the situation for me that says maybe I'm not so welcome there as a brother or sister keeper. If I regularly hear I know but, it means you don't necessarily care about the content of Scripture or the convicting power and the transformative power of the Holy Spirit, because the more important factor is your but. Spell it any way you want to. More important factor is your but. So, looking to close this week, my question to you is, what are you looking forward to? What are you looking forward to this week? What are you looking forward to this month? What are you looking forward to this quarter? What are you looking forward to this year? That's a question I'm going to probably end us with on a regular basis for a while so that it gets ingrained, like Jesus encountered. And someone who is a very knowledgeable individual who's able to turn a phrase, kind of like top of mind awareness, Toma, said this to me when I asked that question. He said, perhaps an inability to answer that question is defined as a failure to plan. If I don't have a life that has me looking forward to stuff today, this week, this month, this year, this quarter, it's because I've practiced a failure to plan. And that person who's able to knowledgeably turn a phrase suggested that this would be the inverse. And because I've failed to plan, I may be planning to fail. Because I failed to plan to have to look forward to things that maybe I'm planning to fail. By the way, that individual's Brother Gene. And that has resonated with me when he shared that with me. If I'm not looking forward to anything, then that's my failure to plan, to have landmarks, to have things to point my rudder toward, to have things to anchor onto and look not behind, but look ahead. And if I'm living there with not looking forward to anything, then potentially I'm planning to fail. So let me pause there, give you an opportunity for any final comments, etc. Thank you guys for joining together and allowing us to spend this time doing this. Hopefully we'll try to see if we can close this interrupted lesson out next week. Your thoughts, your comments? Bunch more gobbledygook?
I like that, what Gene said. Sometimes I think we get, like in the Bible, it says, you know, and I had it in my head until I started speaking and everything kind of went away, that to be satisfied with what you have. But sometimes that can lead to a different kind of complacency that's not allowing you to look forward to things or try to do other things. In other words, you kind of get just caught up in that, well, you know, I'm fine, I've got what I need, I'll just coast along and live my life. But at the same time, we should be looking forward to things, whether it's things, whether it's vacations, whether it's, the different things like that, whether it's Jesus encounters, whether it's, we should always be striving for more, not so much monetarily or, things like that, but that we should have more of that looking forward, because I think that in itself sometimes brings about a joy when you get excited about things. So sometimes there's that both hands, because you hear that in the scriptures, to be happy in whatever circumstances or, be satisfied. Yet at the same time, we should be wanting more in our lives. That's just my thought.
Hey, two quick things. One, Sarah, I dig this camera switching thing. It's
You
pretty
like it?
cool.
Is that okay?
Yeah, because when it goes from your view where we are now to where like Gene is over there, which somebody needs to sit next to Gene. That chair next to him just is disconcerting. So,
Chair.
Well, the view only had Gene in it because I wasn't sure if someone would sit there. So I have that view, and that view.
yeah. So, but it like, I kind of think of like the old Batman series, because it kind of swooshes around and I hear that, as it switches around. So sorry.
And the cows and the bam showing up.
Yeah.
Zowie.
Yes.
Yeah, we like that kind of thing. But, when you were just talking, Sherry, the phrase that came to my mind was, he set his face toward, like Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem, right? And that phrase is used a few times in scripture. And it's just that deliberate focus. It's not that you're going to get there immediately, because Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem, but he had a lot of stuff that happened before he got there. And that's kind of maybe the lesson. And the lesson is when you set your face toward something, the Lord's going to bring a lot of other stuff into your path as you make your way there. So thanks for sharing that.
Kids, thank you, especially Sherry, with your last commentary reminding us. Part of the reason that Christian Club is getting smaller these days, we're not the popular kids on the block, because we don't really look like there's a whole lot of joy emanating from our gang. And we certainly are not excited about anything. We're excited about telling people how awful everything is. We are not excited about telling people how great Jesus and the Holy Spirit are, how great it is to be loved by Yahweh. We'll spend time telling people that. And we are not excited people. We are borderline Boresville. And maybe if we did what Sherry said, the same way we anticipate vacations or a raise or somebody visiting us or a special event, a concert coming to town, a baseball game, the same way we had that kind of expectation and anticipation, that might encourage others around us, because they catch fire to being excited for you, and then sometimes they actually want to participate with you.